And in the end, I remember coming up to the guy and I said, "Hey, thanks for watching out for my littles." And he took off his headphones and he didn't hear me. And then I was like, I said it again. And then he goes, "It's everybody's park." And I thought to myself, this is so beautiful. And this is like a tiny little glimmer of what true equity and inclusion work looks like, which means we are aware of who's the most vulnerable in this community, right?
Welcome to the Coast Podcast. I'm Emily, a virtual assistant agency owner who left Amazon in 2019 to build my dream.
And I'm Whitney, a freelance writer and communications consultant who never felt at home in a cube farm.
We wanted to learn from people who paved their own ways like we did. So we created this podcast to talk to others who are brave enough to pick a different path. Creatives, entrepreneurs, people doing their careers and their lives their way.
Join us as we make new friends, get inspired, and show you beautiful paths less traveled.
Not every road leads to the coast, but the ones that do come with a great view.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to The Coast. My name is Emily Given, and I own a virtual assistant agency in Lynnwood, Washington. We help business owners take their admin tasks off their plate so that they not only can focus more on their business, but enjoy their life outside of work.
And my name is Whitney Popa. I own a communications consultancy in Edmonds, Washington, and I am focused on workshops, and connections for Pacific Northwest small businesses, specifically writing, editing websites, hosting workshops for websites and Instagram and beyond. And I am loving just really doubling down on small businesses. So come at me for any of your small business needs. And today we have Patty Narváez-Wheeler, who owns Practica Consulting and is a career social worker, DEI leader, and anti-racist educator passionate about the power of learning, storytelling, and data. She is a small business owner, mother of two beautiful, bold kiddos, and second-generation Nicaraguan immigrant living and working out of Edmonds, serving clients in the Pacific Northwest. Her core services include designing and facilitating adult learning experiences on anti-racism and implicit bias, and helping organizations and leaders figure out where they are and where they want to be in their anti-racist and DEI journeys. Her approach as a practitioner, leader, and business owner is rooted in her core values: liberation, knowledge, connection, beauty, curiosity, accountability, and joy. Awesome. Welcome, Patty. We are so excited you're here and that we are your first podcast interview.
You are, and I'm so excited to be here. Thank you.
That's such an honor. I love that.
Me too. I remember my first time I was really nervous.
Me too. So nervous.
And I am a little nervous, even though facilitation and public speaking is what I do, but this is a first. So some grace is allowed.
Appreciate the grace too. And as we were saying before we started recording, what we usually do, we keep it very free form, but where we start is, how did you even get into this work and the business that you own now?
Ooh, yes. So I was thinking about this, and I always think of words first, right? So the words that came to mind for my story, my origin story, are it's a little bit of passion, it's a little bit of heartbreak, it's my motherhood, it's my ancestors. So a little bit of all of that. Is there one that brings more curiosity than another as part of the story from you all?
I mean, tell us the full
motherhood.
I was going to say, tell us the full picture, because I'm interested in all of it. The ancestry in particular. That's really interesting to me.
Ooh, okay. And actually, I think I will do the ancestors and end with it to kind of almost chronologically. So, I mean, I've been passionate about social justice my entire life. I literally was the girl in my third grade library coming up to the librarian asking what new books they had about slavery or the Holocaust, or this was just, it was in me. I'm a second generation Nicaraguan immigrant, and I think my passion for justice was really fueled also with some of my first exposures to the motherland. My first trip to Nicaragua, I was 5 years old. And as that kind of going every couple of years was part of my development, I just had at such a young age exposure to really gross disparities, right, in our world. I was living in the suburban Pacific Northwest Oregon city, and yet I have these roots and ancestors and family in what we call the third world and a lot of that poverty, right? And so I saw little girls who looked like me, out on the streets selling their chiclets, right? Street vendors. And yet here I was looking the way that I did, like the one brown girl in a very white classroom, and kind of just this really core understanding of nothing but luck of which border and which country I was born in, afforded me so much more than others. That's kind of like the core passion piece. I've dedicated my life to social justice, started in social work and community programs, and then later decided, I want to sort of like teaching other people to fish, right? Instead of people hiring me to come do this work, let's all take on the responsibility of doing this work. And how can we help teach other people how to engage with diverse communities well, how to meet people's needs well, right? How to have a little bit more justice in the world. So I started to do capacity building, which means, kind of internally facing, teaching other practitioners or employees and that kind of thing. I did that, the last decade or so. And, here we are at 2020, right? I had just had my second daughter, or my second kiddo, which is my daughter. I was coming out of maternity leave, which was very generous up at the city of Seattle, and came in back to work the weekend after George Floyd was murdered by police. And having been part of the equity and justice team at the city of Seattle, it was just such a profound and different sort of environment to come into, even though this is the work I've always done. This is the work my team did. Obviously, we're like living in this historical moment. And I remember being absolutely honored that they held this emergency sort of employee engagement session for folks. And they wanted to create different spaces, one for our Black brothers and sisters, one for our white brothers and sisters, and one for folks who were people of color that were not Black, right? Because our experience and relationship to the moment would be different. And I was asked to be the facilitator for the non-Black people of color group. And I was deeply honored to do that, be asked to facilitate, to hold that healing and learning space for employees, of which dozens of folks, hundreds of folks showed up. But I also remember feeling like a moment of burden and a little bit of resentment that
was going to be my question.
And it was more rooted in this. I mean, it was literally the week after I came back. You're going through your postpartum things. You're going through the return to work first week. And as I looked around to my colleagues, I wished more people had developed the capacity that I had, so that in this moment, me, the one with the newborn in my hands, didn't need to be the one. At the same time, I was deeply honored by the ask and the trust of the leadership and of other employees. But still, so here was just another moment of like, wow, this is why the work that I do is so important. I want more people to develop this muscle. That happened a few months later. I also decided it was time to grow and seek an opportunity elsewhere. And at the time, there just wasn't kind of anywhere to go at the city. And so I looked outside the doors for the first time ever. Anti-racism and DEI was on everybody's lips. There was a lot more opportunities out there. And so I thought to myself, well, heck, let's give this a try. And I did go to an external organization. So I left the city, went back into a different industry. I was in public sector. And it was their first time having DEI leadership. It was their first time really trying to live into the work. They had a new anti-racist commitment and all the things. But in the end, the foundations were not set in that workplace they weren't ready for me. They weren't ready for the work, and not for any bad intentions or anything like that, but just frankly, the right foundations were not set. And so I ended up leaving, and it was an incredibly painful experience. It was so painful. I felt somewhat like a failure. I felt so disappointed. I was so excited at the opportunity. And I also realized that so much of my value had been tied up kind of more professionally in this validation, like this external validation. And so that experience also taught me the importance of organizations and the need for people really laying the right foundations for the work. Because again, what always happens is that, BIPOC folks, especially women, we end up being the sacrificial lamb. And so that decision to leave was heartbreaking. The other part of the heartbreak was in that same similar amount of time. It all started at a Starbucks here in Edmonds. One of my kiddos was getting ready for kindergarten. And we were deciding on which public school to attend because we had a choice. because there was a Spanish immersion program. And I ended up having an encounter with a staff member of one of the public schools here, where, someone straight up to my face told me that, I should go to this school and not that school because that's where Latino students all have behavior issues, and all Latino parents, they just don't care about their kids and their education. So you should probably go here and not there. Oh yes, right there on.
You just make like the stupidest generalizations, like.
And so that was happening at the same time, and I had this another deep moment of heartbreak, and obviously an encounter with racism, which it is not new to me, but it was new in terms of my motherhood like this. And it was again, and we ended up elevating it, and the district responded pretty well in what they could do. We talked to the equity team there, but it was also a really disappointing experience, and also showed how when the proper foundations of the work are not laid, some of this work ends up being performative, or you can't hold people accountable when they are doing harm or wrong, in this case to families or parents. And so that's the heartbreak part of the story. So so all of that kind of came all together. And so I finally get to this place, and this is where the love comes in and the support of my husband. And, and he was like, this job, we're a double income household, right? Like we don't fly on just one, right? And so the decision to leave that job without another job, I'd never even done that in my life, was so big and so hard, as you can imagine. But, us being able to look each other and be like, this is not worth it. Like, this is not worth our health. And like, you are so much more valuable than this thing. So that's how I ended up actually going, hey. Simultaneously, it was also community love that along the years, people have asked me, like, can you come do this on the side, right? It was always this like little thing, a little project here or there. And I had just finished developing an implicit bias e-learning for the city of Seattle, which they still have, and it's up. And people loved it. And people started to ask me, hey, do you do this like outside of the city? And so all of that came together, and somehow a project landed in my lap that was like financially like big enough to kind of be like, okay, I can kind of ride on this for a little bit. And that's how I actually got catapulted into this. And so it feels like very much like a phoenix rising out of the ashes sort of story, that out of this moment in time of some heartbreak with the realities of racism, and then also feeling like something was a failure professionally, all of a sudden opportunity started to open up. And from there, I described it at first, it was like the universe was telling me like little breadcrumbs. Like I was like, can I be on this path? Oh my God, can I really do this? Are we going to make it? Right. And I kept getting these little bits saying, yes, yes, yes. And Emilie, to end the ancestor part, was when I was actually, I forget her name. I think it's Shireen's son. This is the woo-woo side of me. So I had found this like coach.
You're talking to the right.
I thought so. I found this coach who was doing like small business like coaching, and it was like, like a very economical sort of package thing. And it was like this set of videos, but she also had this like spiritual side to it, which I loved. And I had been going through some of the processes, which by the way were beautiful. It was like rooting in your values and like what's the wealth you're trying to generate, but not just money, right? And then like really pulling at you to get more and more to the core of like, what is your why? Like, what are you trying to build and why are you trying to build it? And there was this meditation visualization exercise in the middle of the night, and I couldn't sleep. And so I was like, oh, I'm just going to listen to that. And I put it on, and it was this beautiful guided meditation that was like, imagine that you're literally physically laying the foundation of your business. Like, what do you see around you? What does the ground look like? What's the structure that's emerging? Who's around you? It was that kind of thing. And I was half asleep, but like doing it. And all of a sudden, I really did see in a particular landscape, kind of like a Romeo and Juliet type balcony. And up in the balcony was all of my female ancestors on my mother's side, which I'm very close to. Oh yeah, it makes me tear up. And I saw, Adela, Julio, that's my mom's grandmother. It was Adela, Julio's my mom's mom, all of my mom's sisters, Sandra, Lourdes, Glenda, my mom, and then my mom holding my daughter's hand. And it just popped into my head. And I remember calling a good friend, and she was like, they're giving you permission to go forward on this path. And that sealed the deal for me. And I was like, I'm going to do it. So that, together with the love, support and love of my husband saying yes, and also the realities of school, that the kids get out at 2:30, and I wanted to be home when they're home. And this was a shift in my motherhood. I was fine when we did daycare all the way till 5 p.m., 6 p.m., and that was okay with me. But I entered a new phase of motherhood, and I was like, I want to be home with them. I want to be home when they're home. And so the autonomy of the schedule as well. So all of that created that calling moment.
I got like full body chills. That's incredible. There's so many things that I want to say or like have thoughts about, but
I said a lot.
When you went into that position, it's just really frustrating because a lot of companies post the DEI position being performative, right? They're like, okay, if we hire a DEI person, like, and then they set you up to fail, which is like, again, implicit. Like it's like the whole system is completely racist. It's like they want you to fail, so they don't have to change.
Do they believe? So I had a boss at one point where I came to a point where I realized, like, I think she believes her own lies. Like, to her, they're not lies. And I wonder, it totally depends. But in this case, there probably are so many businesses that intend to do well, and they don't mean to be performative, but they are. And it's hard. Like, you can't really suss that out. You can use your intuition and, some tactical things that you see when you're getting interviewed and when you're also interviewing them, because it's your life too. But I would feel very vulnerable applying for jobs with DEI outside of like the city when you were already doing it and you were embedded there already. Going somewhere new, especially during that time, maybe that's just me being kind of jaded, but I would think they're all performative.
Well, and in that moment, I was incredibly skeptical, right? It's like the world was waking up to things that many of us through lived and also professional experience know has been happening, is happening in a variety of communities, in a variety of systems. And, you do the best you can to try to have due diligence. But this moment was new for everyone, and right? For us as practitioners, for organizations, for communities. But I think, when I look back, I learned a lot, and I left amicably, and nothing was intentional. But I think when I look back now, and with more of my healing, I did have to do a lot of healing from that experience. There is a level of readiness and a level of foundational, it's kind of like the prepping of the soil. There is a prepping of the soil that needs to happen in order for this work to flourish and to grow well. And it's not easy to know what that looks like and how to do it. And I think it very much does. Just like people, organizations, are their own ecosystems. They have their own history. They're made up of a lot of people. And so you do have to be intentional as an organization, and you have to look at yourself. And I think just like anything, right? Like I always think of it that way in the work. Like organizations, think of them as people. We can't grow without self-reflection. You can't grow or understand your gifts or where your areas for growth are without taking a good look at yourself in the mirror and asking some hard questions. And so that's why I really do believe in, and that's part of the services I provide as well, is like, why don't you invite folks in before you hire them on to be able to do a good, robust assessment, to engage with your employees, to listen really well. And also something even as foundational as definitions. What do you mean when you're saying diversity? What do you mean when you're saying equity? What do you mean when you're saying inclusion? What do you mean when you're saying anti-racist? And not just those definitions, but also the processes of them. I mean, that's one thing that I learned was it's not just are people saying the right words, but what was the process that was behind that, right? It's that, how did you live into this?
Right.
That can also be in telling. And it's not about good or bad or just level of readiness for it. And so part of what catapulted me too was a need for some safety. And I thought to myself, I think it is risky, particularly for women of color, And so for this moment in time, it feels safer to do it as a consultant because I get to partner with you, but I don't have to marry into your family, if you get my drift. Right. And so that works for me right now.
So, okay, going in with like your deciding what it means to you and how you set actionable, like how you live what you're saying. Before this call, I was mentioning that at our holiday party, I won the DEI session with you, and I'm super excited about that. So, like, walk our listeners through what a session with you looks like as a small business owner. Like, what are we going to uncover in our session? What groundwork are we going to lay?
Ooh, well, this is a new service, so I can't speak to it well
Okay.
for what it would look like in the shortened version, but I can tell you, for example, in the grander versions. So, for example, I worked with a colleague on a project out of Portland with a large nonprofit that does hunger relief services. And so, they look at their numbers and they're like, hey, we obviously know that a lot of people are hungry in our community, they got a tri-county service area. But we notice that our numbers are so low in our Black, Indigenous, and people of color populations, especially immigrants and refugees. And we know that they're disproportionately experiencing hunger. So what can we do to do that, right? To be better at that. And so even in that first moment, like a lot of consulting, right? It's like that front end where you're figuring out what is the actual problem to be solved here. And so with my approach, it's really rooted in data that already exists. It's really rooted in community leading the way. It's rooted in that sort of self-reflection for the organization, which means you're going to have to take a look at yourself too. This is not just about gazing outward at like, how can I engage these people more or serve them better, but it's also asking the question of why haven't you been doing that already? And so with them, we were able to say, okay, when we look at hunger data in the counties that you're in, we know that, BIPOC folks have been experiencing hunger and poverty at disproportionate rates. So again, that question was, why haven't you already been doing this? And so, and who's already serving folks? And the thing is, a lot of folks already were. So get kind of, social worky and nonprofit on you, but we already know that there's a best practice of folks will engage more readily with more trust with folks of their own communities. So what you have usually in areas in Portland, you've got a lot of nonprofits that are specifically serving the Latino community, or there's the folks that are serving immigrants and refugees already, or folks that are working with the Black community, right? And these are organizations that are the champions, right, in the local community. They already have the relationships. They already have they're already serving those communities. And so these folks who are historically a more historically white nonprofit, and currently they were serving mostly white folks, we could say gently, hey, you don't need to be the direct provider, right? It's not going to be you. You are not going to be preferred in this moment, given realities, history, and the fact they're being served by folks already. So we changed the question and we said, it's not about increasing your numbers. And I remember I loved it when the ED said to me, this isn't just about increasing our numbers, right? This isn't about what we look like. This is about us actually doing our part to support hunger relief for BIPOC communities. And so that was beautiful, right? It made my work a lot easier. And so we focused the question then instead on how can you, being the nonprofit that you are, with your budget, with your resources, with your technical capacity, with your donors, with everything, how can you support hunger relief for BIPOC folks, the other efforts in the region, right? So then we shifted to then talking about partnerships, like organization to organization partnerships, instead of how can this nonprofit serve individual BIPOC community members better, right? And not to say you can't do that. Of course you can. And we worked a little bit on that. But the approach we took was, we're going to look at your own direct services, but we're going to look at partnerships. How are you engaging in the community with other organizations that are doing this work? And we also looked at the policy level. And so my approach is anti-racist. And what I mean by that is that we know that racism functions at different levels. It's not just, what's going on inside of us, how we think about ourselves and others, what goes on between two people, right? That interpersonal piece. But it's also organizational. What are the policies and practices of your organization that are producing certain outcomes? And then beyond that, the bigger, right, like the macro, which is the systemic part, which is like that whole interplay of government, city, federal policy, like how all that stuff intersects. So the recommendations we do in the approached all those things, right? Not just direct service, but community partnerships and also political advocacy, but it was all rooted in what community had already said they wanted and needed because the data was already out there, right? At first they wanted to do surveys and things, but we said, we don't need to do surveys to community. Community is very tired of people asking them what they need. They've already spoken a million times. So my commitment in my work is to not burden community further and instead help, you just got to look around, dig around, and usually there is data already from community members led by those community-based organizations that already have the trust of the community, and they got great data on community needs assessments, right? Like you could look almost in any community and there will be a nonprofit that has done some sort of community needs assessment and the data's already there. So we rooted it in that and what community was asking for.
I love your holistic approach too. Like when we met, I have not forgotten that story about Naomi at the skate park with the older guy.
Yes.
And I love that you think about this in such a community driven way where it really does, like to Emily's question about small business owners, it really gets to the heart of how are you operating within your community as a human? So would you be willing to tell it however long you want the story of being at the new skate park with her and thinking about just being in the world as a mom of a little girl?
Yes. Yeah. So I had this moment. We were up visiting the new, what was new to us, right? I know it's like a year or two old, but
it just opened this summer.
Is it just this summer? Oh, that's right. Okay. So we were there this summer at the new Civic Park. And my kids had not ever been in like an actual like skate park, right? And so when we get there, it's obviously such a diverse mix of ages, right? We've got, my kiddo was probably one of the youngest out there who was 3 at the time, and all the way up to like 38-year-old like skater dudes who are like living their best life and probably living their youthful dreams. Not that they have the skate park in Edmonds, right? Like they have somewhere to go and do this. And so and my kids are also new to skating, right? And they had gotten scooters for Christmas, weren't that great at it, and definitely had not been using them in like different slopes and like, right, I think they've just been on like flat sidewalks, right? And so as I was sitting there and letting them go just have at it, I had this moment of this flutter in my heart, right, as a mom. But I ended up going super meta with this moment, being who I am, thinking about like equity and inclusion work of here I am looking at this skate park, and all of a sudden, right, I kind of had biases that were coming into my mind around like, what were these old like teenage skaters going to be like with my kids? What were the older dudes going to think too? Were people going to get annoyed of the little kids? Like I sort of was coming at it with a lot of awareness of my own negative stereotypes and assumptions about whatever group of people was here. But I'm aware, and that's what we can do, right? We bring our biases to awareness. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to trust this moment and just trust and let this experience be what it is. I also, though, felt heightened like safety concerns. I was like, I don't want my kids to get trampled over by other skaters who are going faster and who are bigger than them. But again, I had this moment of I have to let them have this experience. I have to let them also develop awareness of the world through experience, right? And also got to let the older skaters also have this experience to see what they're going to do with this moment. And so in the end, what I ended up seeing was there was this probably the oldest, at least seemingly the oldest person in the park, maybe, I don't know, like late 20s, early 30s man. He had on a very cool Love and Basketball throwback jersey. I remember that. And he had his headphones on, right? So he was in the zone. He's on a skateboard. And then I saw him be so mindful and inclusive of my daughter, Naomi, who is I don't know how tall she is. Very short, all of 30 pounds. She's tiny. And she was scooting along without a care in the world, kind of oblivious, right, to her side, like to the sides. And she's just going, and she was totally in his way. But I saw him more than once completely dive out of the way and like put on the brakes and like basically ditch his skateboard just to make sure that he wasn't going to hit her because she was the one getting in his way, but she's completely oblivious, right? And so I saw this moment happen several times, and I thought to myself, I had a lot of assumptions coming in here on how these older skaters would act towards my very young children. But what I saw, and I wanted to protect my kids from this newness and this difference, right? But the fact that I let it happen and then saw that in reality, all these other skaters were coming in with the same community feeling that I was, that this is a skate park for everyone, right? And in the end, I remember coming up to the guy and I said, "Hey, thanks for watching out for my littles." And he took off his headphones and he didn't hear me. And then I was like, I said it again. And then he goes, "It's everybody's park." And I thought to myself, this is so beautiful. And this is like a tiny little glimmer of what true equity and inclusion work looks like, which means we are aware of who's the most vulnerable in this community, right? And that is the tiniest kiddos. And we can trust that people can honor that reality and adjust accordingly. For example, the fact that he just ditched his skateboard in order to not hurt this small child. And it didn't really cost him anything in the grand scheme of things. So it was quite a beautiful little moment. And now we go all the time, and I trust it 100%.
I think that's a really beautiful testament to what you said is just community building. It's everyone's park, and people want to invest in the younger generation. And it's not like you said he was helping her out, but making space for her. And
exactly.
Also, it's a beautiful message that she's allowed to take up space, because a lot of parents would be like, watch out for them. Don't get in anyone's way. And I like that the message was you do your thing, girl. I like that.
Yes. Well, and we can trust people. We can be collective.
Mm-hmm.
At our heart, human beings are collective. We've been taught by our dominant culture not to be, but we can be, and it can come very naturally to us. And that very much that reminded me of that. It was like this small moment of reminding me of that reality. We are perfectly capable of living in community within our diversity. And we can be mindful of those most vulnerable and still all have a good time, right? And still all prosper. We can all still have a good time. We can all, right? And so it was a wonderful reminder of that community and collective.
What's next for your business? What do you want to mold it into?
Ooh.
In the next stage, I guess, because you're building, you're coming out with new offerings.
Yeah.
What does that look like in your...
Ooh, I do know exactly. So last year, my word for my business was discovery. And I really loved that. And I was like, I'm gonna mess up. I've never done this before. I am going to mess up. It's going to be imperfect, but I'm going to discover a lot. And I even kind of played around a little bit with different sort of versions of services. And so I did that discovery, and I was also in a research phase. I'm a very planful person. And so I sought out, books and podcasts and things and all that. And then I came up with a plan, and then I had also done that values kind of what's the wealth you want to build? Wealth being, of course, being more than money, right? What's the wealth you want to build? What are your values? So having that root was super important to me. Giving myself permission to explore and discover and mess up and not have it all figured out yet. Plus actual work and experiences and clients, all of that led me to come to this place where I had a better understanding of, financially what I wanted the year to look like. But I think I moved from reactionary and I'm moving into more intentional, right? Especially because of the way I told you the origin story. I sort of kind of came out of the fire, the ash, rose out of the ashes, had opportunities sort of land in my lap. And so I really have found myself shifting from more to reacting to sort of what landed to thinking farther down the road and thinking ahead and thinking about how do I make this more intentional. And so the word for this year is really intention and action. And one of the ways I started it as well, I was like, okay, I know my values. I have a sense of the services. Part of what I wanted to do, which brings me to the DEI consultation for small businesses, was I really wanted to democratize access. That's the best way that's the way I thought about it. I was like, I do love and have been working with organizations, right? But I just really wanted to be able to offer the learnings that I have and the guidance. Like, how could I make this more like person to person? I'm a social worker at heart. I love connection. It's one of my values. As I've gotten to know other small business communities, see what the things that you all do here and be really rooted in my local community, I was like, I want to be able to partner with folks who are not going to afford, right, like the tens of thousands of dollar contracts with, that a nonprofit will do, or that a public jurisdiction will do. So I want to move into, and that's kind of my project for this year, is figuring out how to package and scale so that I can offer my gifts not just to organizations at large, but to individuals. And so I want to do that through these small consulting, power hour kind of bundles, as well as access to the e-learning. But I'm in the middle of figuring out like what learning platform to use, right? Because I don't actually have a learning platform. So I'm still in discovery with how to do it. But that's the plan. And I also realized totally worth it to invest in help, right? Like I can't do all the things. I ran into the classic, right, tension we all grapple with at first, which is I was trying to be the entrepreneur, like the E-Myth book says, right? The entrepreneur, the technician, and the manager all at once, and a mother. And I was like, I cannot do this all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I can't do it all. And so, yeah, that kind of that mindset of understanding the worth of investing. I think I was telling Whitney this a while back too, or I had this day. I have been building up this list. I kind of wanted to do this official marketing of myself to all these different, kind of DEI leaders in the Pacific Northwest. Very like planful approach of like, who I'm going to do this. And then I tried to build my own newsletter in Canva. And while I have a little bit of a design, right, background, and I build the e-learnings, but oh boy, I got so frustrated. And I realize now, right, the universe was telling me to pause because that was 3 months ago. But that, like bumping my head up against that wall, I remember that day felt so frustrating. It was one of those days where I almost was like, I'm going to give up. This is too much. This is so overwhelming. Like, just go back and go get a job somewhere, Patty. But now looking back, it was just this growth moment that was showing me the value of, okay, where does your expertise, time, and energy need to go? It needs to go in building the business and like these core passionate, like the core passions that you have for your services, but all the other stuff that goes with it, right? The accounting, the graphic design, the communications, the marketing, the copy editing, right? All that stuff was like, you need to find other people to help you do that. So I've started to do that, and I'm working with someone to do actual branding that then can kind of cascade into all the comms and marketing that I want to do.
I would come to all your workshops, by the way.
Yeah, me too.
Oh, thank you. They are pretty dope.
Yeah, if you hosted a workshop, they would be bananas. And it would be a good testing ground for you too, to see the e-learning.
Yes. And then the other thing was that like a really practical approach that was really rooted in my motherhood as well. As I was coming up with this like plan, and I had like these targets, like financial targets, and they were specific. And I was like, how many hours do I actually have to work on this in a way that keeps me rooted in my values? And so I sat down and looked at the calendar, and I was like, I don't have the traditional amount of hours of like a 40-hour work week. That's not how it's not my reality. And it's also not rooted in the values that I've already set out for like what's going to ground me in this work. And so I actually worked backwards, and I calculated all the days off that the kids have from school, right? I calculated the hours of work I typically have. I've sprinkled in sick days. I sprinkled in vacation time. And then I came up with this amount of hours that was quite kind of less than you would typically think if you Googled how many working hours do you have in a year. And I looked at that, and that also helped me be so much more discerning with my time and energy.
What I always tell people taking that a step further is like, how much time do you have in a week? How much do you bill hourly? And how much would you be paying an assistant? Therefore, how much money are you losing during your week doing things like designing a newsletter and like responding to emails and scheduling meetings? Like, that's what I tell everyone. And people don't get it until they're like, wow, like I'm wasting time and money. So that's really exciting that you're doing that. I'm happy for you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's been a tremendous journey of growth and self-awareness and just layers that kind of, just this work to be a small business owner and entrepreneur, to be doing it in something that you're so deeply passionate about and gifted in. It's so many layers of discovery of self. And I've really deeply appreciated it. So I'm so grateful for it. I'm really grateful for it. There's been so much confidence that's built, maturity as well, and also a lot of humility too.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. We would love to get into rapid fire questions now. So these, we have a couple of questions that we ask every person that's on the podcast. So what are you proudest of in your business right now?
To be unapologetically anti-racist and discerning of who I want to work with.
Tell us about a book you read or a podcast you listened to that recently changed the way you're thinking about your life or your business.
Well, I just finished a very radical book called Why Anti-Racism Means Being Anti-Capitalist. I think I butchered the title, but at the beginning is what is anti-racism? Oh, and why it means anti-capitalist. And I think also the journey as a small business owner made me reconsider or kind of more deeply understand my relationship to capitalism. And what I mean by that is, what practices and policies I support and don't through the choices of my business. And something even just like marketing, right? I just realized a lot of the marketing stuff felt really icky to me. It was so rooted in just not values-driven things, right? Or at least not any of mine. And so, even when I found someone to do marketing consultation with, amazing woman named Monica Schroeder, by the way, I discovered that there's such a thing as ethical marketing. There's like a whole group of people that are completely into ethical marketing, right? And so the book made me sort of reaffirm my commitment to remember to never, or, to not forget how racism is intertwined with capitalism as well. And so the long leap from that big old giant statement to kind of smaller microcosm of just thinking of my business has just been particularly around marketing, right? Just transparency and
no scarcity marketing.
Yeah, exactly. And to really think about an abundant mentality. And I love what the same marketing consultant said to me. And she goes, because you also have to, I realized I was bumping up against even internalized capitalistic thoughts that I have, right? Of like, this is competition, right? And so I was like, wait, so like having that come up and go, wait, no, right? Being aware of those and saying, oh, that's right. That's not in service of me or in alignment with my values. But what happens when we shift to an abundant mindset? And I loved it. And she said to me, how many clients you're getting? Whitney, I think you said this to me too. Like, how many clients can you have anyways in a year? I'm like 4 or 5. So when she said that, it was also helped give me permission to not really care so much about what everyone else is doing. People are going to have different flavors and styles and personalities they're attracted to, even within the same line of work and services. And that's okay. And really, you're just here to attract 4 people out of how many hundreds or thousands, right, of the people in your audience, which for me is like, anti-racist practitioners or DEI leadership throughout the Pacific Northwest. I'm like, that's hundreds and thousands of people.
Yes.
You are just attracting 4 or 5, Patty, right? And so that was really freeing.
That's a good reminder for everyone in business.
Yes.
Well, we did that article too, the True Northwest thing. That was part of the interview questions. How do you address competition or something? I was like, I don't
believe in competition. Yeah. This is kind of a morbid question, but it's honestly my favorite one. What would your last meal be?
That's such a hard one because I just recently discovered that I'm allergic to gluten, dairy, and sugar, which
also
means I would probably eat all those things.
Yeah. You're gonna die. So
something with gluten, something with dairy, and something with cane sugar, because I just learned that's why my stomach's been hurting so much. Oh, probably some delicious breakfast, like pastry, like some sort of ridiculous, like really fluffy, beautiful French toast piled on with like whipped butter and bananas and some sort of glazed something.
Yes.
Like that, right?
Yes.
Like complete stomach ache, but totally appropriate for a last meal.
Yeah. I love that.
Your stomach doesn't ache in heaven.
Agreed.
Thank you. Yes.
What is the best business purchase in the last 6 months under $100?
Oh, all my books. Ooh.
This is the second person in a row.
Yes.
We've never had anybody
Ever.
Oh my
That's
God.
amazing.
I just stacked up. I've got that whole why anti-racist means anti-capitalist. I bought Nelson Mandela's autobiography, which is huge. A beautiful, beautiful novel called, which really strikes immigrant motherhood. What's it called? I will tell you guys later. Something Neruda in the Park. A beautiful memoir on Palestine. A couple more. Like that's what for Christmas. I'm like women with shoes. Like it's with me in books, and I know I should do better and get more from the library, but I also just love having my collection to hold and to share with others and
to smell.
Exactly. And I have to have physical books. I know my husband always tells me like Kindle, and I'm just like, I can't. No. I need to hold it.
I love holding it. Also, I can't. So I'm an Audible person.
I'm
not very good at, I have to be multitasking. It's weird.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, but that will change. What's lighting you up lately?
The Puget Sound water here in Edmonds.
Agreed.
I've been working out of the Waterfront Center a lot.
Oh.
And that has given me great peace and joy.
And have you tried the new toasts from Shore Pine? They're so good.
But I do love the Shore Pine latte. I've been having that. That's like my new favorite thing. It's got a sprinkle of like vanilla and cinnamon.
I think they just got rid of them.
What?
Yeah, they moved to Alki Bakery stuff. They're not doing their own.
Schubert, you're ruining my life.
I know. I think it's to open that, like, cut costs to open that new bar dojo in Woodinville.
Yeah, that looks sexy. Not gonna lie. I love Waterfront Center, though. It's so beautiful.
It is. It's beautiful.
And the last question. This comes from Rain Wilson. That's actually a really hard name to say. Rain Wilson. Whitney and I both read his book, Soul Boom. I just finished like last week.
Mm-hmm.
And he asked this on his podcast. And the question is, what is one life experience that everyone should have?
A immersive cultural experience in a country in which you are the foreigner.
I love that so much. I have never had that experience.
It's very humbling.
And I really want to.
It's humbling, and I think it right sizes our global perspective.
And it doesn't count like going to a resort in Mexico. Like, no.
No.
That's
an
amazing.
element. You can strike up wonderful conversations with folks there too, but
yes,
if you can, an immersive experience, share a meal with a local family and talk.
Yeah, I love that. Like Anthony Bourdain style, really in it.
Matthew McConaughey did that a lot in his memoir. He talks about that a lot, and it's really interesting. Anyway, good talking about memoirs.
Yeah, he's on my list too.
It's good. He narrates his own audiobook, but also those are like experiences of white men. So
I lived and worked in Nicaragua in my mid-20s, which was profound, wonderful experience and a big conversation for another day. But some of the best conversations I often had was with taxi drivers, just asking them about life in Nicaragua, politics, economy, relationships.
I love that. I always talk to my Uber drivers, but that's here. Patty, thank you so much for spending time with us. Thank you for letting us be your first podcast interview. Thank you for doing the work you're doing. We're so excited to know you.
Oh, thank you very much, Emilie and Whitney. It's been a pleasure and an honor. I appreciate it.
And how can everyone find you?
Oh, you can find me at Practica Consulting PNW.com. And LinkedIn.
And we'll link that in the show notes. Oh, and LinkedIn. Okay.
And
we'll
LinkedIn
link
as well.
Both of those in the show notes. And that's all we have for you today. So thank you so much for joining us on this episode of The Coast. We will see you next time.
All right. Thank you both. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.